Bank manager makes an apprentice wait 2 hours. His face changes when board members walk in. What would you do if you were kept waiting for 2 hours by someone who was supposed to meet with you? How would you react if that person's attitude suddenly changed when important people walked in? Emmanuel nervously adjusted his tie as he stood outside Mr. Johnson's office. The young apprentice had arrived precisely on time for his 9 a.m. meeting with the bank manager, eager to discuss his progress and future prospects at Lagos's most prestigious financial institution. Little did he know that this day would change the course of his career in ways he could never have imagined. As the minutes ticked by, Emmanuel's excitement turned to confusion, then frustration. He watched as other employees came and went, casting curious glances his way. Some offered sympathetic smiles, while others whispered among themselves. Emmanuel tried to maintain his composure, reminding himself of the opportunity he had been given and the importance of making a good impression. An hour passed, then 2. Emmanuel's legs began to ache from standing, but he dared not leave his post. He had heard stories about Mr. Frank Johnson's temperamental nature and feared that any perceived lack of commitment could jeopardize his position at the bank. Just as Emmanuel was considering whether to knock on the door or admit defeat, Mr. Johnson's office door swung open. The bank manager emerged, his imposing figure filling the doorway. His eyes narrowed as they fell upon Emmanuel. "Ah, the apprentice," Mr. Johnson said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I suppose you've been waiting to see me?" Emmanuel straightened his posture and nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. We had a meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. Mr. Johnson glanced at his watch and shrugged. "Did we? Well, I'm a busy man, you know. Can't be expected to remember every little appointment." He smirked, clearly enjoying Emmanuel's discomfort. "Well, come in then. Let's see if you've managed to learn anything useful in your time here." As Emmanuel followed Mr. Johnson into the office, he couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and apprehension. The meeting had finally arrived, but at what cost to his dignity? Mr. Johnson settled into his plush leather chair, leaving Emmanuel to stand awkwardly before the massive mahogany desk. The bank manager began to rifle through some papers, seemingly oblivious to Emmanuel's presence. "So, apprentice," Mr. Johnson said without looking up, "tell me why I shouldn't just replace you with someone more qualified, someone who understands the value of my time." Emmanuel took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. He had prepared extensively for this meeting, reviewing every aspect of his work and the bank's operations. Despite the humiliation he had endured, he was determined to prove his worth. "Sir, I believe my performance speaks for itself," Emmanuel began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "In the 6 months I've been here, I've consistently exceeded my targets and received positive feedback from both colleagues and clients. I've also taken the initiative to—" Mr. Johnson waved his hand dismissively, cutting Emmanuel off mid-sentence. Yes, I'm sure you think you're doing a marvelous job. But tell me, what makes you think you have what it takes to succeed in this cutthroat industry? Do you really believe you belong here?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emmanuel felt his heart racing, but he refused to be intimidated. He opened his mouth to respond when suddenly a commotion outside the office caught their attention. The door burst open and a group of well-dressed individuals entered the room. Emmanuel recognized them immediately as members of the bank's board of directors. Mr. Johnson's demeanor changed in an instant, his face transforming from smug superiority to obsequious charm. "Ah, esteemed members of the board," Mr. Johnson exclaimed, rising quickly from his chair. "What an unexpected pleasure! To what do we owe the honor of your visit?" The lead board member, a distinguished older gentleman, fixed Mr. Johnson with a stern gaze. "We're here for an impromptu evaluation, Mr. Johnson, and it seems we've arrived at a rather opportune moment." Emmanuel watched in astonishment as Mr. Johnson's face paled. The bank manager's eyes darted between Emmanuel and the board members, a look of dawning realization and horror spreading across his features. The lead board member turned to Emmanuel, his expression softening. "Young man, I believe we haven't been properly introduced. I'm Mr. Adebayo, and I must say, I'm impressed by your patience and professionalism in the face of such challenging circumstances." Emmanuel's mind reeled as he struggled to process what was happening. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "I'm Emmanuel Okafor. It's an honor to meet you." Mr. Adebayo smiled warmly. "Emmanuel Okafor? Ah, yes, I believe your father is one of our most valued shareholders. He speaks very highly of you." The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. Mr. Johnson's face had turned an alarming shade of gray, his earlier arrogance replaced by sheer panic. I had no idea," Mr. Johnson stammered. If you had known what, Mr. Johnson?" Mr. Adebayo interrupted, his voice sharp. "That Emmanuel was connected to someone important? Is that how you determined which employees deserve respect and fair treatment?" Emmanuel stood in stunned silence, watching as the power dynamic in the room shifted dramatically. He had never mentioned his father's connection to the bank, determined to make his own way based on merit alone. Now he found himself at the center of a situation he could never have anticipated. Mr. Adebayo turned back to Emmanuel, his expression grave. "Young man, I must apologize on behalf of the bank for the treatment you've endured. It's clear that Mr. Knapp Johnson's behavior falls far short of the standards we expect from our leadership team." Emmanuel nodded, still trying to process the sudden turn of events. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your concern. I've always believed that hard work and dedication should speak for themselves, regardless of one's background or connections." Mr. Adebayo's eyes twinkled with approval. "Well said, Emmanuel. That's precisely the kind of attitude we value in this institution." He turned to address the other board members. "I believe we have some matters to discuss with Mr. Johnson. Emmanuel, would you be so kind as to wait outside for a moment?" As Emmanuel left the office, he could hear the beginning of what promised to be a very uncomfortable conversation for Mr. Johnson. He sat down in the waiting area, his mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired. 15 minutes later, the board members emerged from the office, followed by a visibly shaken Mr. Johnson. Mr. Adebayo approached Emmanuel with a smile. "Emmanuel, we'd like to speak with you further about your experiences and insights," he said. "It seems you have a unique perspective on our operations that could be invaluable as we move forward." Emmanuel nodded, still somewhat dazed by the turn of events. "Of course, sir. I'd be happy to share my thoughts." As he followed Mr. Adebayo back into the office, Emmanuel caught sight of Mr. Johnson being led away by two of the other board members. The once imposing bank manager now looked small and defeated, his earlier arrogance replaced by the realization that his actions had consequences. Over the next hour, Emmanuel engaged in a frank and productive discussion with the board members. He shared his observations about the bank's operations, his ideas for improvements, and his vision for fostering a more inclusive and respectful work environment. By the end of the meeting, Mr. Adebayo was beaming. "Emmanuel, I must say, your father's pride in you is entirely justified. Your insights and character are exactly what we need in our leadership team." Emmanuel's eyes widened. "Leadership team, sir?" Mr. Adebayo nodded. "Indeed. We believe you have the potential to make a significant impact on this institution. How would you feel about taking on a more substantial role? Perhaps as our new deputy manager of operations?" Emmanuel was speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by the opportunity being presented to him. I would be honored, sir. But are you sure? I'm still relatively new to the bank." "Sometimes, Emmanuel, fresh perspectives are exactly what an organization needs to thrive," Mr. Adebayo replied. "Your ability to remain professional and composed in the face of adversity, combined with your keen insights and strong work ethic, make you an ideal candidate for this position." As the reality of the situation sank in, Emmanuel felt a mix of excitement and humility. He thought back to the long hours he had spent waiting outside Mr. Johnson's office, never imagining that his patience and perseverance would lead to this moment. "Thank you, sir," Emmanuel said, his voice filled with determination. "I promise to do my utmost to live up to your expectations and to help create a work environment where every employee is treated with respect and given the opportunity to excel." Mr. Adebayo smiled approvingly. "That's exactly what we want to hear, Emmanuel. Now, let's discuss the details of your new role and how we can work together to implement some of your excellent ideas." As Emmanuel left the bank that evening, his head spinning with the day's events, he couldn't help but reflect on the strange twists of fate that had led him to this point. He had entered the building that morning as an underestimated apprentice and was leaving as a respected member of the leadership team. The experience had taught Emmanuel valuable lessons about perseverance, humility, and the importance of treating others with respect, regardless of their perceived status. He vowed to carry these lessons with him throughout his career, using his new position to create positive change and foster an environment where talent and hard work were recognized and rewarded. As he stepped out into the bustling streets of Lagos, Emmanuel felt a renewed sense of purpose and excitement for the future. He knew that the challenges ahead would be significant, but he was ready to face them head-on, armed with the knowledge that integrity and perseverance could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. The story of the apprentice who became a leader spread quickly through the bank, serving as a powerful reminder that true character and ability often reveal themselves in the most unexpected ways. And for Emmanuel, it was just the beginning of a journey that would see him transform not only his own life, but the culture of the entire organization. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, comment what you learned from the tale, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting life lessons folktales, just like this one. Thank you.